Imagine stepping into a bustling, sun-drenched city like Rio de Janeiro. Maybe not for Carnival, but for a really high-stakes diplomatic showdown.
Yeah, that's pretty much the scene, July 2018.
Exactly. It felt like a real moment on the global stage.
Mm.
You had leaders from some of the world's most powerful emerging economies gathering.
Yeah.
And they weren't there to party.
No, definitely not. They were there to challenge something they saw as, well, a growing economic threat.
And that brings us to our deep dives today. We're talking about the BRICS nations. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Right.
They came together with this really specific, urgent goal. Pushback against the United States tariff policies, which were really ramping up then.
Policies they saw as disruptive, maybe even unfair.
Absolutely. So we're going to unpack why this meeting in Rio wasn't just, another summit, why it felt like such a critical point.
And look at what was really driving those U.S. tariffs.
And the complex game plan this sort of superhero team of nations was trying to figure out how they wanted to respond on the world stage.
And this is, it's way more than just looking back at history, isn't it? It's a fascinating case study.
Totally.
It tells us so much about how global economics and diplomacy are always shifting, always evolving. We're going to peel back the layers of that moment.
Get into the motivations, the strategies.
Exactly. And the ripples, the effects that honestly are still shaping things today. It's about understanding the why behind these big trade tensions, not just what happened, but why it mattered and sort of what happened next.
And the scale is just immense. BRICS back then represented what, like half the world's population?
Roughly, yeah. And around 40% of the global economy. So when they spoke or tried to speak with one voice, people listened. Washington was definitely paying attention.
Okay, let's really get into the heart of it then. To properly understand that tension building in Rio, we need to know the players and, well, what made them pick economically.
Right.
So on one side, you've got BRICS. And like you said, it's more than just a catchy acronym.
Much more. It's a significant force. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, each a major player in its own right.
And the origin story is pretty interesting too, right? The whole idea wasn't even from them initially.
No, it was actually coined by the economist Jim O'Neill back in 2001. BRIC initially, without the S for South Africa.
He basically predicted their rise.
Yeah, he looked at the trends, population, growth potential, and said these economies were going to be dominant. And, well, he wasn't wrong.
And then they formalized it. First summit in Russia, 2009.
That's right, in Yekaterinburg. That's when it shifted from an economic concept to a more formal political and economic bloc.
And their goal became pretty clear.
Yeah, to challenge that long-standing dominance of Western economies and really promote what they called South-South cooperation.
Strengthening ties between developing nations.
Exactly, kind of building their own power base, trying to shift that global balance a bit.
A formidable alliance, you could say.
Definitely. Now, flip the coin. On the other side of this global chessboard, you had a very different tune coming out of Washington.
The America First agenda?
Precisely. And that wasn't just rhetoric. It translated into direct economic action, primarily tariffs.
Which are basically just taxes on imports, right? To make foreign goods more expensive.
Essentially, yes. But these weren't like standard adjustments. These were pretty aggressive, often punitive duties. The stated reason was always, protect U.S. industries, protect American jobs, sometimes maybe force other countries to change their ways.
And the timing was key here, just before the Rio meeting.
Absolutely key. The threats had been building since January 2018, but new rates were literally set to kick in on July 9th, the day after the main Rio discussions.
Targeting things like steel and aluminum.
Right, under a national security justification, Section 232, and then a whole range of Chinese goods under Section 301, citing unfair trade practices, IP theft, things like that.
And the reaction globally. It wasn't quiet.
Oh, not at all. It basically ignited a trade war almost overnight. Retaliation was swift and widespread.
It's like the EU hitting back on bourbon and Harleys.
Exactly. Iconic American products. Canada targeted U.S. steel, aluminum, consumer goods. China went for really crucial U.S. exports like soybeans, cars.
So a proper tit-for-tat escalation.
A classic trade war scenario unfolding.
And the big international bodies, they started sounding alarms, right? This wasn't just a minor spat.
No, this was sending shockwaves. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, they warned about global trade growth slowing down significantly for 2018-2019.
Because of these tensions.
Directly because of them. And the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they put a number on it, potentially a 0.5% hit to global GDP.
0.5% might not sound huge, But globally.
Globally, it's trillions of dollars in lost activity. It affects everyone, everywhere. It was a serious, serious tremor.
Okay, so this is where Rio gets super interesting.
Yeah.
Picture that Sunday, July 8th. Foreign ministers, top negotiators, huddled together.
Yeah, the atmosphere must have been pretty charged.
The big question was hanging there. Could these BRICS nations, with all their different interests, actually come up with a unified plan?
A coherent response to the U.S. moves.
Their immediate goal seemed clear enough, right? Put out a strong statement.
Definitely. Condemn the uncertainty, the disruption caused by the tariffs, make their displeasure known.
But the way they planned to do it was, well, clever,
Yeah.
diplomatic.
Very. The plan was essentially to criticize Washington's policies without actually naming the U.S. or President Trump.
Like diplomatic shade, you called it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Subtle, but powerful. It let them register their protest, signal they were ready to push back, but crucially, maybe keep the door open for talks down the line. Avoid just slamming it shut.
And we know diplomats from, 11 nations had already drafted something similar, so there was broader agreement.
Yeah, it showed this wasn't just a BRICS concern. There was wider international unease about these protectionist moves.
But, and this is a big but, how united could they really be? Even a powerful group has internal issues.
Absolutely, and BRICS certainly did. A major one bubbling under the surface was their disagreements over things like the crises in the Middle East, particularly Syria.
How did that play in?
Well, you had Russia and China generally backing the Syrian government. Brazil and India were often more critical, maybe aligning more with Western positions on human rights or political transition.
And South Africa?
South Africa was often trying to find a middle ground, mediate. So imagine trying to craft this unified trade statement while you've got these fundamental geopolitical differences simmering in the background.
That complicates things significantly, makes presenting that solid front much harder.
Hugely. It's a real tightrope walk.
And China, specifically, seemed to be walking a particularly fine line, even though they were getting hit hard by the tariffs.
Yeah, China's position was fascinating. They were arguably the main target of many of these tariffs, facing huge potential losses. You'd think they'd be leading the charge for retaliation.
But they played it cool.
Remarkably cool. Very cautious. Remember, they'd just gone through some intense negotiations with the U.S. There was sort of an uneasy truce holding.
Ah, so they didn't want to rock the boat.
Exactly. They didn't want to risk derailing any potential progress, however fragile it might have been. It was like watching a chess master.
Thinking several moves ahead.
Precisely. Balancing that immediate urge to hit back with the longer-term diplomatic game, it wasn't weakness. It was strategic calculation, pragmatism over immediate reaction.
Okay, so pulling back to the bigger picture. This Rio meeting wasn't just talk, was it? It felt like it could genuinely shift the direction of global trade.
It absolutely had that potential. The world was watching really closely. What happens if BRICS really digs in? What happens if Washington doubles down?
Two very different paths seemed possible.
Starkly different. Path 1. A united BRICS pushes hard for multilateralism, for sticking to global trade rules, maybe even reduces protectionism globally, a more cooperative path.
And path 2.
Path 2, the scary one. Washington responds with even more tariffs, BRICS maybe retaliates harder, and you spiral into a full-blown, damaging global trade war.
With potentially massive consequences.
Catastrophic, potentially. And, history gives us some pretty stark warnings here.
Like the Smoot-Hawley tariff.
Exactly. 1930, raised U.S. tariffs, everyone else retaliated, world trade basically collapsed, deepening the Great Depression. A brutal lesson.
Or even the U.S.-Japan trade friction in the 80s.
Yeah, less catastrophic, but still caused significant disruption, managed trade deals, long-lasting debates about fairness. It just shows how easily these things can escalate and how damaging protectionism can be.
So the Rio meeting wasn't just about reacting to the tariffs then. It was also about their own long-term plans.
Absolutely. It's shown a spotlight on their ongoing efforts to build alternatives. They weren't just playing defense, they were actively trying to shape a different kind of global economic order.
One less dominated by the West.
That's the clear goal. And they've been putting down real markers for years. Look at the new development bank, the NDB.
All right, the BRICS Bank.
Yeah.
Established 2014.
Yeah, and it's not just symbolic. It actually funds infrastructure, sustainable projects, and emerging economies. It's a genuine alternative to, say, the World Bank. They're funding real projects, renewable energy, roads.
Investing in their own growth and others.
And trying to promote trade using their own local currencies more.
To rely less on the U.S. dollar.
Precisely. Reducing dependence on the dollar, reduces vulnerability, reduces U.S. leverage. It's all part of that bigger vision challenging institutions like the IMF and World Bank, pushing for a more multipolar global financial system.
And we should stress the impact of those tariffs wasn't just theoretical for these countries. It was hitting them hard, individually.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't an academic debate for them. China was staring down billions in losses, maybe a hit of 0.5% to 1% on their GDP growth in 2018 alone. That's huge.
India got hit with steel and aluminum tariffs.
And hit back on U.S. farm goods like almonds and apples. Big impact on their export plans. Brazil, a huge agricultural exporter, coffee, sugar, soybeans, suddenly saw its biggest market for soybeans. China, looking elsewhere because of the U.S.-China fight, very vulnerable.
Auto, too.
Yeah, already facing sanctions, saw its exports to the U.S. drop, more economic pressure. And South Africa, relying on mineral and agricultural exports, faced reduced access to the U.S. market, making its existing economic challenges even tougher.
So for every single BRICS nation, this was a direct hit to their economy, their growth, their people.
Exactly. It was immediate, tangible, and deeply worrying for them.
So wrapping this up, that Rio meeting in 2018, it really feels like a marker, a significant moment.
Definitely pivotal. You had this powerful bloc of emerging economies standing up, directly confronting protectionism. It signaled a real shift, didn't it?
A push towards a different kind of world order, more multipolar.
Trying to steer things towards cooperation, even amidst rising conflict.
Yeah.
Making their collective voice heard.
And looking back now from, say, July 2025, that core tension is still with us, isn't it? Cooperation versus protectionism.
It absolutely shapes so much of our world. That moment in Rio is such a potent reminder. Actions in global trade have these huge, complex ripple effects.
Often unintended consequences.
Right. And finding that path to economic harmony, it's always this delicate dance. Strategy, diplomacy, sometimes those subtle power plays.
Really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does. How much have we actually learned from these high-stakes moments, these diplomatic dances of the past? And maybe more importantly, how will those lessons, learned or not, guide us going forward in this incredibly interconnected world?